Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Budish. I'm the Executive Director of Transit Choices. We are a grassroots coalition that has been advocating for an equitable, efficient, and reliable multimodal public transit system for Baltimore and beyond. And we've been doing this work for over a decade. It is our pleasure to introduce today Bill Struever, who is our guest speaker. He is the principal managing partner, CEO of Cross Street Partners. Bill will be sharing with us today his presentation titled Reinforcing Penn Station as a Nexus for Baltimore's Transit and Trail Systems. At the conclusion of Bill's presentation, we will open the floor to questions, comments, and feedback. But before we turn the floor over to Bill, Jimmy Rouse, Transit Choices co-founder, would like to make a few remarks. Jimmy?
Yes, I've known Bill for probably 50 years now, since we were in our 20s. And he's been such an incredibly visionary force in the redevelopment of Baltimore since its terrible slow days in the 70s. He was involved in Never on Sunday and the redevelopment of a few houses in Federal Hill when Federal Hill was still a very tough neighborhood. And he began what became the revitalization of that area. He then moved his offices up to Charles Street in the 500 block and revitalized the Charles Street Association along with Mayor Schaefer, and was directly responsible for bringing me into the picture by presenting me with the opportunity to open Louis Bookstore Cafe and replace Kramer Books in the 500 block of Charles Street back in 1981. Subsequently, he on and hopscotched around the city with different development projects, each of which has been a major force in their neighborhood. He was involved in the redevelopment of American Can and Tin Deco in Canton, and which brought about began the revitalization of that neighborhood. He hopscotched across the harbor and developed Tide Point, which brought about a revitalization in the area around Tide Point, Locust Point. And he has continued to do that. He was the Muncie building, was an office building downtown that they became one of the first apartment conversions. He did a magnificent project at Clipper Mill that brought in Woodbury Kitchen. That is a beautiful redevelopment of an old neighborhood that had burnt down, an old warehouse that had burnt down. And he's just been such a positive force in this city. And sometimes I feel like he gets too little credit for what he's done. He also was involved when I started talking to him about transit and Baltimore's good transit system. He encouraged me to get people together, and that eventually resulted in the development of Transit Choices. So he's been a major force in my life. He's been a major force in the city's life. And so I just wanted to introduce Bill and say how glad I am he's working on Penn Station and in the Station North neighborhood. So go ahead, Rob.
Thank you, Jimmy. Bill, welcome once again, and the floor is yours.
Jonathan, want to put up the show?
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
See it.
All right, let me, is it, can you still see it?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, good.
So thanks So you just reminded me, Jimmy, that it's next year will be a half a century, 50 years since we, Carver, Fred, and I came to Baltimore, and started our great adventure in trying to make a little bit of a difference in the world. And I've got to say, Louis Bookstore Cafe is one of those great moments in time that was for me just such an important thing, not only for our kids growing up, but for our city. So those of you who missed Louis Bookstore Cafe and what Jimmy created with a bunch of raggedy artists, it was a magical place in the 500 block of Charles Street. And I see Jimmy's brother Ted's on, my longtime partner and great friend, as we adventured in Baltimore and many other cities, trying to take on the challenges of our world. And I've always believed that the challenges of America are going to be determined by how we as a society deal with the challenges of our cities, whether it's about public education and good schools, or economic opportunity, or decent housing. Take your choice. And Teddy and Jimmy's dad, obviously were just such a huge force in that. So with that, there's 4 things I want to touch on in this little show, and then eager to hear what everybody has to say in terms of the themes, the opportunities around Penn Station. The first is Penn Station as a gateway to Baltimore and our region. The building on this unbelievable investment by Amtrak in the Northeast Corridor. And now with that, our new governor's huge commitment to improving transit, and the Penn Station as a key regional rail hub for MARC and the transit system. And then secondly, as a connector, Charles and North was always the crossroads of Baltimore. And if there is a place in our city to bring together East Baltimore, West Baltimore, North Baltimore, South Baltimore, the harbor, the rest of our town, Black Baltimore, White Baltimore, suburban, city, rich, poor, it is Penn Station and the Station North area. It's why the folks at Equitech really picked Railway Exchange to be their hub for Baltimore's emerging entrepreneurship community, to bring all of Baltimore together. This is the spot. So that's the second theme. And the third is as a hub, not just as a transit hub, to advance the governor's goal of making greatly improving access for families without cars, the great jobs, great amenities, and opportunity. That's some statistic floating around that if you live in East and West Baltimore without a car, the typical commute is over an hour right now, and each way. So it's a transit hub, but then also as a hub itself. And we'll talk just for a couple minutes about our current thinking for the Penn Station Historic Headhouse as kind of the ultimate bringer together of our community, entrepreneurship community, as kind of a lively clubhouse and percolator of ideas and collaboration. And then the fourth point is the opportunity after the pandemic kind of to rethink our economy and downtown. I believe that the devastation to the traditional office market is here to stay into the long-term future, and rethinking not just Baltimore's downtowns, but downtowns across America is going to be a big endeavor for all of us. And I believe Penn Station and its position on the Northeast Corridor and its role as a transit hub and a spot on Charles Street, the original Fifth Avenue of our great city, to connect all the great things that are going on in our city as we try to rethink a downtown that only has a small fraction of the weekday daytime office workers that it had pre-pandemic, not likely to come back, that has blocks that are 80 or 90% vacant with ground floor retail. We need to rethink that, and I think there's a role. So those are the four themes. Penn Station is a gateway, as a connector, in the crossroads of Baltimore, as a hub, both for transit and for economic opportunity, and then as a launch pad for rethinking our downtown. So with that, the amazing, I don't see Brian Traylor or the Amtrak folks on here. We are so fortunate that Amtrak hung in here when their ridership went from 100,000 a day to 3,000 a day with the beginning of the pandemic, 97% drop. And we were like saying, holy smokes, is Amtrak going to be able to keep its commitment to Penn Station? And I got to say, it's just our congressional delegation, the Amtrak, just hung in there all the way through the trials and tribulation pandemic. And it's now back. I believe it, the ridership may actually be over the 100,000 a day. So it's a complete recovery. So the investment, not only the $200 million that Amtrak's investing in improving Penn Station, but the $12 billion they're investing in the Northeast Corridor, fixing up the kind of speed bumps along the corridor, like the BMP tunnel with the new Frederick Douglass tunnel, $4 billion investment, a new fleet of Acela trains that are about ready to go into action, $2.5 billion. And the commitment to increase peak hour service to every 30, can you imagine, every 30 minutes, an Acela train going through Baltimore, Washington, and New York and back. We have a big project in downtown Dayton next to a proposed Amtrak station for the multi-city connector, Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, Cleveland, and they're like dying and going to heaven. We're going to have 6 trains a day, going, and we'll have 6 trains every half hour between Mark and Acela going through. So this unbelievable commitment to the Northeast Corridor is a huge launch pad that we're excited about. Next slide. So again, as a connector, you have the river, you have the tracks, you have I-83. So one of our big things, and very shortly, we're excited, we'll be rolling out the KPF master plan that Max Beatty and team have been running, our partner at Penn Station Partners, for the Amtrak land between the 2 tunnels. 7 development sites. Next slide. 7 development parcels with a potential of as much as 3 million square feet of mixed-use development on Amtrak controlled land between the 2 tunnels. And as important or more important than that, not shown on this slide, actually the next slide, is jump one more, Jonathan, and then we'll go back. Yeah, so the catalytic private development. So it's not only the development opportunity of the 7 Amtrak-owned parcels along the tracks, but the catalytic opportunities. I'm sure all read about Zalco's 560-unit plan for apartments on the old post office site with the University of Baltimore, and many other, Central Baltimore Partnership and the Charles Street Association's plans for North Avenue and Charles, renewed North Avenue Market, ton of great stuff up there. And then over east, reconnecting into East Baltimore, long divided by the I-83 into Johnson Square and their master plan and opportunities. So huge opportunities, not only with Amtrak's development, which could be as much as $2 billion of investment, but with the catalytic development around us. Go back a slide, Jonathan. And the other key endeavor, not without its day-to-day issues we're working through is the multimodal connectivity at Penn Station, leveraging off this amazing investment by Amtrak in the Northeast Quarter. As many of you know, we were successful with a $11 million raise grant and really focused directly around the station at making better connections to other modes of transportation. And one of their current struggles is as we increase bus transit, how we can, with the new passenger rail concourse on the north side, improve car access to Penn Station, because we expect a major increase to the 3 million riders a day that go through Penn Station. So a big emphasis on connectivity, multimodal around Penn Station. State provided $1.5 million planning grant to Central Baltimore Partnership to look at the South Plaza. And yes, at least for right now, the statue is staying. We got a letter from the City Public Arts Commission. I didn't know one existed, but they said they would very much like it to stay. It's kind of grown on me, but we're rethinking the South Plaza, a big focus on Oliver Street and the connection, kind of the new north-facing focus of the University of Baltimore campus and connecting over to the cultural district, Micah and Mount Royal. So multimodal connectivity, a big part. Let's of this. Skip the next slide, Jonathan. So one of the things we're working on with the state is, you probably have also heard, is our new governor is a big fan of TOD, and we'd love to make Penn Station the ultimate model TOD. We're going to blow away Union Station in Denver, which is pretty amazing if you've been there, as a TOD. So we're now working with our neighboring community groups under the leadership of Central Baltimore Partnership on TOD plans, and then working with the city, with the new finance director, Michael Moyasev, and the mayor, who are rolling out bold new ideas for city investment vehicles in our neighborhoods. Long overdue. I'm very excited about that. And the opportunity for Penn Station as a model TOD to work with this great new leadership at the state level, with the mayor's emerging plans around creating a major investment vehicle for our neighborhoods, and what we can do with that. So big opportunities in terms of funding infrastructure connections. You'll see when we roll out the KPF master plan, some super cool ideas for connectivity and greening, with a list of low-hanging fruit projects that we think we can implement quickly. Next slide. So this has been at it almost a half century, and this is the most exciting time in our work in neighborhoods in Baltimore and other cities in terms of public funding support from the federal government, from state, and now, with what the mayor's proposing at the local level. So a whole series of ideas and opportunities for us to capture major investment opportunities, to leverage off the TDD, to leverage off Penn Station as a transit hub, to leverage off Penn Station as a hub of entrepreneurship activity and all the amazing stuff going in the neighborhood around us. And I go on the lower slide row there, the second slide, you can just kind of see there, one of the things I'm most excited about, if we can find $5 million, is an idea that Race Pace Bike proposed a couple of years ago, is to take the handicap parking lot that's between the headhouse, Historic Headhouse, St. Paul Street, where the garage comes up, the elevator from the garage comes up, and do a 2-level bike facility, lower level. This would be so much cooler than that weird glass dome next to Union Station. It would have on the lower level a bike repair and rental, and on the upper level sales stuff. And then it would have this Japanese technology storage thing where you bring your bike up, do your key fob, it would grab your bike, and the 80-foot long, 60-foot high, 12-foot deep glass structure above it, all lit up. And you imagine pulling into Penn Station on your way from New York to Washington or whatever, and these bikes are going around. Super cool. So we want to be the hub for all kinds of stuff, including bikes, and reconnecting, kind of the central hub for our bike and pedestrian walkway system, working with Johnson Square, reconnecting over to East Baltimore and on to EBDI and then down to the harbor. So a lot of funding opportunities. Next slide. And then two ideas that we're pitching that we think are low-hanging fruit. How low the fruit is something we're talking about with MDOT and to do. One is an idea that Tom Wilcox, when he was chair of the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance, he called it the Silver Line, which was a MARC commuter rail shuttle from BWI rail station to Martin's Airport Middle River Station, taking advantage of the improvements coming to West Baltimore MARC Station, improvements to Penn Station already underway, adding 2 stations in East Baltimore, EBDI, that we think would be huge. It would create a great connector into the heart of East Baltimore, next to the city's biggest employer, Hopkins Medical Campus, just a couple blocks south, and really building on Governor Moore's goal of creating better access to great jobs for families without cars. So East and West Baltimore, great access onto the MARC, this proposed new MARC shuttle system, made possible by the $4 billion investment into the BMP tunnel that will allow greater capacity on the northeast quarter. Bayview Station, long plan, and then a connector out to the 20,000 jobs out at Sparrows Point and Trade Point Atlantic. So that's one idea that we're pitching. And the second on the right is, looking at this dysfunctional dead end dogleg light rail connection. The 3 million riders a year, I predict there's been maybe 10 riders a year riding light rail, if for those who even know it's there. So we're working with MTA right now on ideas of how to make that a meaningful connection to the existing north-south light rail. The original plan that Schaefer had back in the day when light rail was launched was to have a north-south connector, a Y connector into light rail. There's also ideas around having an automated shuttle or merely a much better light rail connector, special light rail connector between Camden Yards and Camden Station and Penn Station. So low-hanging fruit. And then lastly, before questions, back to this idea of Penn Station as a launch pad for rethinking downtown. I was at board meeting for the Downtown Partnership last year, which is in their 40th year now, celebrating. And I believe that this devastation of weekday daytime office worker market, which is probably around 30% of what it was pre-pandemic, is not likely to come back to where it was. And the devastation of our ground floor retail activity is not likely to come back without a major restart of what our downtown is. This is a challenge, in every other city we're working in right now, and downtowns across America, is what can we do? Our city is not going to thrive without a thriving downtown. And it is amazing to me to be thinking of the level of distress that downtown has, relative to the distress we've been trying to address for so long in our neighborhoods. So a great time for new thinking. This window onto the northeast quarter is an amazing opportunity to connect. And we have an image when you see our master plan of Charles Street as the old Fifth Avenue, connecting our city north-south, and then building on the great things that are going downtown, what's going on at the harbor with the new thinking around Harbor Place and the area around it, the energy around our stadiums, the continuing growth at University Center and the Biopark, the amazing new Lexington Market, the arena. I mean, who would have thought that crappy old arena would be doing what it is today? And how can we knit all this stuff together? And we see Penn Station as a key part of that thinking. How can we use the Northeast Corridor as a way to not only create a vehicle for people to live in Baltimore and exit and commute to DC or Philadelphia or New York, but to bring the economic energy of NASA, of Fort Meade, of the amazing Department of Defense and NIH resources just to our south into our downtown in a meaningful way. So anyway, those are my 4 themes. I talked way too long. Penn Station is a gateway, as a connector, crossroads of our city, as a hub, both for transit and for entrepreneurship and our business community, and as a launch pad with Downtown Partnership and other key players to rethink the future of our downtown and our neighborhoods. So with that, I blabbed way too much. Questions?
Bill, thank you. It's very, very exciting. And, we appreciate your commitment to this very important project. And with that, we will open the floor to questions. You may raise your hand. You may put a comment in the chat. And at the conclusion of this meeting, I will send both the PowerPoint presentation as well as the meeting recording to all meeting attendees. Jim. Jim, Lannis?
I don't have any questions. I didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry.
Not a problem. Let me just see. There was a hand.
David Ben.
David Ben.
Hey, I want to thank Bill. It's amazing. You've been continuing to do this for 50 years. You're still out there being a visionary, and you're still out there doing good projects. So it's astounding. I guess my question is, it really is a big challenge. You've sort of been working on repurposing manufacturing and old buildings in neighborhoods, and sort of we've been dealing with that whole part of the city, and now we have the problem of the whole downtown with its office needed to be thought about again. Are there examples you're seeing anywhere that where people have really started making progress on that? I mean, when we were doing this in the 70s, there were a few examples of renovations of old manufacturing warehouses and things like that, but other than, transferring office buildings into housing, we're still having problems with retail, et cetera. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really I think an exciting time in rethinking downtowns. I look at Detroit. Baltimore Metropolitan Council had a cross-sectional leadership group go out in the spring, and with a guy from Quickens and the Downtown Partnership Detroit, really exciting plan around placement, a very focused placemaking strategy that they've been leveraging off these great new resources from the feds and others. So I think there is a lot of creative thinking about creating place, and it's not just about having a restaurant next to the Hippodrome. It's about how do you create a real place around the Hippodrome, so when you come out of Everyman or the Hippodrome, there's a dozen restaurants and a ton of stuff going on. How do you create place around arenas? So I think Detroit's just one place to look. Another thing that Bruce Katz, the one of my favorite kind of urban thinkers, used to be at Brookings, now at Drexel Lindy Center. He's got a whole thing on what he calls the defense dividend, where there's this mushrooming funding into defense research, defense contracting, NIH, and so on. Right now, the benefits of that are not going to downtowns. They're going to suburban areas, rural areas, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, and they're not going to downtown. So one of the things we'd like to think about is how he wants to use Baltimore, Dayton, and St. Louis as models where they have huge federal resources in and around downtown. How do we capture more of that for downtown? So that's a whole nother conversation we can have about how to resuscitate downtown.
Gotcha.
Klaus?
Yeah, good morning, Bill, and I'm glad that you actually lived up with this presentation again to the glowing introduction that you got from Jimmy, by really capturing all the points that are relevant for the redevelopment of Penn Station, and that in light of this new paradigm of cities with the lack of office and the lack of commuters, which will, I agree with you, stay. And so I think that the points that you made about mobility and access and visitors coming to Baltimore, the city as a place where people exchange and where people meet and where people need to get to and where there is an experience to be had, that is exactly the way of how the city can break through this new paradigm and keep itself attractive. And Penn Station, as you say, really has an important role to play in this, because we are really lucky, and you are one of the few that keeps on saying this. I still wait for this to resonate more in the political realm too, that we can be so lucky that we have that asset to be on the only US high-speed rail line that there is, and that we have this frequent service there. And I'm glad you have now also a slide on multi-modal, and that you have strengthened this TOD, when you say you want to beat Denver, that will be quite a thing to do, but the aspiration is great because there's a lot of potential. So I'm very hopeful and very happy and optimistic from your presentation. And so that's not really a question, but I hope that all these things come to bear, and your presence on the team really brings in these broader perspectives. I think that we can really be glad you are on it. Thank you.
Daniel?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Bill. Thanks for being here today. Just a question kind of following up about the multimodal design aspects of the plans here. It's kind of a two-part question. One, I'd say would be, at what point is the design in terms of how far along it is? Like, are we working with the final design at this point, or are there still things that are being tweaked? Is there like a percentage that you're at right now for design? And then two would be, I've heard from some local stakeholders that are very invested in kind of the multimodal design aspect, people in the cycling community, people that are in the transit community, kind of worrying about how some of the designs seemed to kind of lack certain meaningful connections, say for existing bike infrastructure, or that there wasn't enough space for enough buses to be coming and going along the sides, things like that. So I guess I'm also wondering to what extent you are kind of engaging other stakeholders in collaborating on this design, and if you've heard that sort of feedback, and if you've been able to kind of do anything with that feedback.
Yeah, so great question. Is Charlie Bond on? So Charlie's the maestro from our partner Beatty Development on the multimodal, and has been working with a cross-sectional group, I don't know, 40, 45 people on this in terms of how to improve connections. And then your point's a good one. How do you balance between, because we are looking at improved bus service. One of the north-south transit options of the regional transportation study is on St. Paul Street, with the reality that people are still going to come to the train station with their luggage and by car and get picked up by car. So it is a great question. Jonathan's on. Jonathan, anything you want to add in terms of the this question on the multimodal and how we're engaging with the broader community?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well. I mean, that's pretty much what's currently going on, and there's been a lot of back and forth discussion between the state and the city, and Amtrak and us as well, trying to sort of work in all the different components between pedestrians and bicyclists and buses and cabs and Ubers and, vehicles. There's so many different modes, so to speak, that we want to be able to give everybody, their fair shake to some extent. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we can get all the people that need to get to the train station because if they're taking a train, we think that's positive. So we don't want to make it harder for them. So it's been a long slog, so to speak, with everybody, but we're getting close. And the image that we showed earlier was, I believe, the current thinking.
Yeah, and on the Penn Station's should be the hub for the bike network, but it's very disconnected. So we are, one of the things when we'll roll out the KPF master plan is looking at how to better connect north along the Jones Falls Bikeway and then east into Johnson Square and south, looking at this idea that's been kicking around about bringing the Jones Falls Expressway down to street level and making it more of a boulevard to better connect east-west. So I think there's a lot of good thinking going on around this connectivity and, eager for continued lively dialogue. And like we're saying, one of the hot subjects right now is we got Charles Street and St. Paul Street, and how are we going to balance bus drop off with car drop off? And I'm sure we'll work it out.
Thank you. Anna?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. It's very exciting. I hope all this comes to fruition. My question is kind of following up on this whole multimodal idea. A long time ago, or some years ago, the decision was made to put the bus station, like the Greyhound bus station, way down in South Baltimore, where it's really not terribly accessible. And it was not put at Penn Station, which sort of seems like the logical place for it to be. Is inner city buses, like Greyhound and Bolt and whatever else is out there now, is that part of this multimodal plan? Is my question.
That's a good question. I've not heard anything new. It's been years since I heard the idea of Greyhound being on Lambvale Street, and I haven't heard anything new about that. One thing that we're hoping is going to come with this, and this CEO of Amtrak mentioned, I've been pushing for Amtrak to cut their fares by 50%, and then they'd increase their ridership by 10 times with this greatly improved every 30-minute peak hour service, much more reliable, much quicker, on the basis that it's just crazy that it costs $160 to get from Baltimore to New York one way. And so my hope is there's going to be substantial price reductions as ridership picks up and the improvement of service, and that will make rail more accessible to more people. So the Bolt buses, for example, will be less necessary as an alternative. But intercity buses are going to remain important. Your question's a good one, and frankly, again, Charlie Bond's not here. I don't see anybody from MDOT or whether that's been part of the discussion, but it should be. You're right.
Klaus, did you have another question or feedback?
Just back on this intermodal, and Jonathan and Bill know that I have been harping on this for a long time. And as I said, I'm glad to see there more recognition of it. But it was earlier this year in Holland where and you probably as a team have long looked at Holland as an example, because the national government converted 6 or 7 major train stations and rebuilt them with similar principles that you have here in mind with TOD and intermodality. And what you see on those train stations after I went there and visited them is that you really need to provide substantial real estate for these intermodal interactions, and just putting the buses and lining them up along the street edge where they are today, that's probably not going to be enough. And the other thing that I learned there is in Rotterdam, for example, which was a very car-centric city, they really had the political courage to put the priorities for the pedestrians and gave the most space for pedestrians, and then the taxis, then the buses, and the car last. And that courage to really set these priorities and assign the space is necessary. And I know you guys can't do this alone. You need the partners to have the same courage. But when I hear, yeah, well, the people will still drive there, and then we need to balance this, doesn't sound like courage to me. It needs to be really 1, 2, 3, which what the priorities are: walkability, and then transit, and then the car third.
Well, I think, Klaus, you're going to enjoy seeing the KPF master plan, because there really is an effort on creating more space for connectivity, pedestrians, in multimodal transit. And your point's a good one, and it's one that we need to work on. I'll come back to, you mentioned the Dutch. You know, my nephew lived for 5 years in Amsterdam. They have that bike parking garage out front. When we could blow them away, because right now the bike storage sucks at Penn Station. We could blow Amsterdam away with the race pace bikes. I mean, how psychedelic, super cool that would be in branding Baltimore. All we need is $5 million out of all these federal funding sources, and we'll have something to make the bike experience at Penn Station better than Amsterdam. How cool would that be?
Thank you. Jean Lee?
Good morning, everyone. I was a little bit late to the presentation, so I might have missed this if it came up earlier, so forgive me. But I have a couple of questions on that same point of intermodal connections. The first one is, has any thought, so taking a look at that new high-speed platform, the northernmost one, has any thought been given to creating pedestrian stairway access, like directly to those platforms from places like Calvert Street and Guilford Street, west of the station? Because the platform is so long, it actually runs for those 3 city blocks, and potentially people can like directly access the facility from the neighborhoods as opposed to walking all the way down to enter the station. And the second question that I have is, has there been any thought or consideration, collaboration with MDOT/MTA with regards to connectivity between Penn Station and the nearest metro, which would be State Center? I don't know if that would mean like potentially running a shuttle service. I know that there are new metro cars coming out that are supposed to make the service more reliable, and there's been some, I guess, hype around that, but potentially debuting a shuttle service between Penn Station and State Center Metro with the new metro cars coming out, just to reinforce that idea of intermodal connections and Penn Station as a transit hub for the city.
Yeah, 2 great questions. The pedestrian access to the new high-speed rail platform on the north side of the tracks. There will be, and very much part of there's a new passenger concourse on the north side. The existing concourse will connect across. There's a temporary bridge being built right now across to that new platform. So the plan very much is to create great access down to that from the north side with access from Charles and St. Paul Street through the new concourse. The idea of a pedestrian connection between St. Paul and Calvert and Guilford, that's a new idea. I think that's it. We've talked about, because we have development sites adjacent to that platform, that we're going to have parking down at the grade level coming up to a street level podium for new development, about connecting those garages. So yes, we should be thinking about how that would work, and definitely put that on the list with Amtrak. On the second thing, connection to Metro, 2 ideas. So one, you saw that image of the automated car that would go from Penn Station over to the, at least to the Mount Royal station, but potentially to the State Center station, which would be, I guess, half a block from Metro. So that idea is out there in terms of a better connection on that side. Also, Al Berry's on, and if we had time, Al could talk about ideas floating around, better connecting Metro East-West. There actually is a kind of a dog leg on the Broadway station at Hopkins that goes a block north. And wouldn't it be cool to connect the Metro there to a new EBDI MARC station and make that connection? All good ideas. Keep the good ideas coming.
John?
Hey, thank you, Robin. Hey, Bill, this is John Hilligus from the Greater Washington Partnership. I want to say thank you for the presentation. I think this has been a priority for the Greater Washington Partnership because Penn Station is such a critical asset for Baltimore and the region. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts of how the people on this call can help champion this vision, because there's still a lot more to be done, whether it's just this, we're talking about the station or the area and the visions you guys have around that. So do you have any thoughts on how we can kind of help this move along, if there's specific pain points or challenges that you're experiencing?
Yeah, another great question. So a couple levels about how to help. One is around this connectivity, multimodal, hub at Penn Station in terms of making sure we are all doing a great job of engaging and exciting our neighbors to feel a part of this and feel connected to it as we look at our little master plan, how it relates to this kind of larger master plan and the multimodal discussion around it. Building support is huge. And then on the larger issue, to me, one of the great tragedies of the Red Line, some of us work back to the Glendenny Regional Rail Plan of like 100 years ago. It was at least 15 years of planning that got ixnayed by Hogan, I think in part because we were not unified in a broad, enthusiastic advocacy as a community around the Red Line. So I think all these ideas desperately need broad support. And I always worry that these funding opportunities are fleeting in nature and very competitive. And without a broad enthusiasm, we're just not going to, even the low-hanging fruit ideas, the EBDI station's $150 million. And that's low-hanging fruit in the transit world, in my estimate. It's not billions like some of the other stuff. So we need our region, our broadest community, the business community, our civic leadership, our institutions, all our neighborhoods, all to rally around this as something that's important as we work local, state, and federal in terms of, rallying the resources. It's going to be a huge investment to do the infrastructure connections that we'd love to see. You'll see in the KPF master plan. So we're doing a little pitch at GBC's Economic and Transportation Summit. And a key part of this is the role of Penn Station Transit as a way to bring economic activity into the city and not just a commuter way for people to live here and go work elsewhere. So the Greater Washington Partnership is key. We want to bring some of those amazing resources that the Greater Washington Partnership has, like I said, Fort Meade, NASA, NIH, all those great things, federal offices, and start using this hub in the Northeast Corridor, amazing improvements to start bringing that economic activity into our city, into our downtown. So great question. We need a ton of people rallying around this in support of our mayor or the governor, our congressional delegation, if we're really going to make the ongoing investments to capture this opportunity and get my $5 million for my race pace bike.
Thank you. And when does the KPF master plan come out?
Jonathan? Are you still there? Shortly. Margaret may know, I think in the next week or two, we're having meetings with our neighbors as we speak, and getting feedback, because it is, in its preliminary form. So we're, socializing it now, and it will be out, I think, shortly.
We have time for one more question. And Jim, would you like to share your thoughts or ask a question?
Bill, I didn't have a question, and I give you, by the way, a lot of kudos for this presentation. I think there's one thing that's important to recognize relative to transit in Baltimore, and that is, who are the transit riders? And I think the question really boils down to why the Red Line failed in its pre-existing format. It didn't give the preponderant transit riders in Baltimore the attention they deserve. We recognize that transit riders often are not office workers. In fact, more often than not, they're not office workers. And the transit system that was designed by the Red Line folks really gave precedence to people who drive. I mean, it's just that simple. They weren't the riders of transit. And the other thing I think that needs to be thought about relative to the transit system is there's one line in Baltimore, and that's the Metro, that has speed. And speed is important. The whole point of these systems that we're talking about is to cut the time that it takes for people to get from one end of the city to the other. And it really is critical that speed be elevated in importance to one of the most important issues in terms of any rail transit, certainly, and bus rapid transit probably, for all of its expense, doesn't do a heck of a lot more than simply good headways. Having quick headways on reasonably well-organized roads can really improve the transit experience in Baltimore. So it doesn't all revolve around Penn Station. I was out there last week with Klaus and David Ben to a Lambda Alpha presentation at the station, and I'm very impressed with what you folks are doing there. I think it's going to be a huge help for Baltimore, but it's not the only solution that needs to be considered. It's not an either or situation. It's a plus, plus, plus that we have to look at. And to pretend that Penn Station is going to be the solution for all of Baltimore's mobility problems is just not a correct interpretation of the realities we face.
Yeah, no, I agree. Fair enough. A transit solution has got to be comprehensive in nature and really address where everybody is and where they want to go. Broadly speaking, we're hoping that the improvements we're talking about will be a step in the right direction, but it's definitely just one step. And I think it's exciting. We have a governor that really believes in transit, who's committed to transit and connecting people that don't have cars to where they need to go. I think we have the most transit-friendly administration in my lifetime, and I just hope we're able to take advantage of it while we have it.
Well, I agree with that, Bill. I can't argue with that point.
Actually, there's one more person. Al Barry, are you still with us? Al? Okay.
Hey, Al, I see your iPhone there.
Right. He wanted to be recognized. Perhaps not. Well,
Al is leading this effort with a group. What do they call it? Smart Link or something like that, or
Smart Line.
Really cool ideas to kind of build on this new Red Line energy. And if he was here, he'd talk about it. I'm sure he probably got bored with me talking all the time and fell asleep.
Well, perhaps another time. But what we'd like to do at this juncture,
Oh,
Bill.
here I am. Here, Robin.
Yes,
Here I am. Sorry.
not a problem.
Just a few things real quick, because I know you're going
Sure.
to wrap up. One, congratulations to Bill. Loved working with him for his 50 years or more in Baltimore. And this is another chapter in his revitalization aspirations that the whole city and region will benefit from. But I want to comment that the other investment that Amtrak is making in the region has to do with the West Baltimore MARC station. It's a huge investment. It's a huge opportunity. But the principles that Bill and his planning group and Amtrak are so establishing at Penn Station are not being followed at the West Baltimore MARC station. The design of it that was released at a community meeting the other night, I think there's another virtual meeting today, basically misses the integration of the potential of a future red line, the highway to nowhere, all of that current initiatives coming from the federal and state government is not being followed in a redesigned West Baltimore MARC station. The West Baltimore MARC station can have MARC service within 30 minutes to Washington, D.C., is a much quicker connection than the Camden line. And we want to urge Amtrak people on this call, and certainly the MTA people on this call, to stop being stubborn and say that, well, this design we conceptually got approved a number of years ago shouldn't be integrated with this new highway to nowhere planning, as well as whatever red line the state is going to propose. So thanks, Bill, for your leadership on this. And I hope to follow up with some of the Amtrak and MTA people that we've been trying to convince them to change.
Thank you. Agreed.
Well, everyone, we've come to the conclusion of our meeting. Bill, we want to sincerely thank you for your time with us today. It was a really informative and interesting presentation. There's been so much progress on the project, and we look forward to inviting you back to share more exciting updates. And to each of you, this would not be possible without your ongoing support and interest of the work that Transit Choices is doing. So thank you for sharing part of your day with us. The next Transit Choices meeting will be held on Thursday, October 26th. We have two exciting presentations, one from Holly Arnold, MTA Administrator, who will be talking about a number of their key projects and initiatives this year and beyond. And a second presentation from Allison Scott, who is the new Red Line Project lead, and she will be sharing some exciting updates on that project, as well as feedback that they've received from the recent public open house meetings, and of course, next steps. So we wish you all a wonderful day, and please stay in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.